Well, we are rolling right into week 3 of the college football season. Alabama survived. I don't know if that's the right word. A scare, maybe. Another ugly game against South Florida, one that Tide fans certainly want to forget. But a win is a win. A lot to discuss from that game as they now go on their first road trip against Wisconsin. Mike Johnson, Simone Eli going to break it all down and preview what is ahead for the Crimson Tide. Let's go head to head. Welcome in, everybody. Hope you're having a wonderful week. Excited to be chatting with Mike Johnson once again as we talk about Kalen DeBoer's Alabama Crimson Tide. And Mike, maybe this was the first time, it was the first time I will say, that we saw a little bit of things just not go as smoothly under the DeBoer era. Not exactly what you wanted to see there in the first half, maybe the first 3 quarters and some change there in Tuscaloosa. You were at the game. Let's get your immediate reaction to what this one looked like against South Florida on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to use the term there were some chinks in the armor, but I think that's definitely what it looked at. And I think that anybody that watched the Western Kentucky game, Simone, was like, I don't really know what to think of this Alabama team. They didn't have to sustain drives. It was all about explosive plays. How good is Western Kentucky? And I think we got a little bit better look. And the truth is, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Like Alabama is somewhere in the middle of what you saw against Western Kentucky and South Florida. Sure. But hats off to South Florida. I think they came in with a great game plan. Yeah. It's weird to say this day and age in college football, but I think Byron Brown, the quarterback for South Florida, probably made himself some money, if that's fair to say at this point. Yeah. I mean, he really had a good
certainly
game.
A thing to say, yeah.
I know. Yeah. But look, South Florida's defensive line really did a great job controlling things earlier on, forcing some of the penalties that we saw throughout the game. Slanting and really running a bunch of different stunts and forcing Alabama's offensive line into a number of errors along the way. So good matchup. Love that Alabama battled back and bounced back at the end of the game and really kind of put their foot down. But there are definitely questions along this offensive line for sure.
Yeah, when you look at 42-16, you don't think that there was ever a doubt of what this looked like. But there were times, on Saturday where you were a little bit uncomfortable if you were an Alabama fan, if you were anyone watching that game. The Crimson Tide went into it huge favorites and came out winning big, but not certainly feeling overly comfortable. But a learning experience nonetheless, Mike. And it's one of those games where you're glad you won. You're also glad it's over. You may never schedule the Bulls again for ever after that, after the last 2 years. But what do you think Kalen DeBoer walks away, and what do you think the biggest message is to his guys as they now move into week 3 against a power 4, 5, whatever it is, opponent in Wisconsin?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, you got to clean up the mistakes. This game, Simone, actually reminded me, a lot of people talk about the Clemson game in 2008. It was being really the first time that a Saban team kind of put their foot down, and it was kind of the end of the Tommy Bowden era and everything for Clemson. Really, Alabama splashing on the scene. A lot of people forget that in week 2, we played Tulane, and it was a squeaker. I mean, I think it was like 17-6 or something like that. I had to play left tackle. Andre Smith was out. Brian Motley gets a start. A number of other people moving around on the offensive line, much like you saw this past week with South Florida. I mean, it was you think the offensive line is going to be a strength, and then you move a couple of pieces and you add and subtract, and all of a sudden it's not. Penalties are the great equalizer in college football, right? I mean, you can have all the personnel you want to, but really it's a game plan game, and it's about how well you can execute that game plan. And when you can't, and the penalties start to come out, and I think Kalen DeBoer alluded to it in his press conference, really 180, maybe even 190 yards taken back because of penalties in the first half. And I know that a lot of people talk about Wilkin Formby. I was at the game. I was actually sitting next to, I played right tackle as a sophomore. I was sitting next to Drew Davis, who played right tackle in 08 and 09. And we were both looking at each other going, I know that guy wants to exit the building right now. I mean, everybody is kind of booing him along the way. So it's unfortunate. And shout out to Elijah Pritchett that steps in. I think Wilkin Formby's a great player. I think he's going to be a great player. I think he was just overmatched in a lot of different ways. You can clean up some technique and just take away the holding calls, allow Jalen Milroe to do his thing. And I know that's what Kalen DeBoer's message is this week. You have to clean things up. Some of the calls were ticky-tack, Simone, but I'd rather him be tic-tac right now against South Florida than against Wisconsin, Georgia, and some of the other teams you'll play down the stretch.
When you think about younger, newer guys being in that position, kind of thrown into that position, trying to kind of learn baptism by fire a little bit when it comes to just kind of being thrown in there with the injury and the shakeup at offensive line, things that nobody could have expected and how it all went down with Caden Proctor and just the shuffle and all. Do you feel as though that there should be a concern at offensive line in it moving forward and it gelling the way that you wanted to see? And with that, do you think that Kalen DeBoer was too patient a little bit? I'm not asking you to be the head coach of the 11 Crimson Tide. There's a reason that we're sitting here and not on the sideline on Saturdays, right? We don't get paid that money to make those decisions. But there were a lot of people calling for him to get yanked. When he did get pulled and they made a change, we saw a significant change in penalties. We saw the offense roll a little bit there in the second half. Again, it's easy to play Monday morning quarterback, but what do you think? Do you think that the chain was too long, so to speak? How do you kind of assess that?
Well, first and foremost, I think when you look at Will Conformi just as a player, I think he's dealing with a lot of the same things that Caden Proctor did last year, where you're such a big dude, right? I mean, you're 6'7", 6'8", you're 340, 350, and a lot of times you start bending at the waist when those legs get tired and you have longer drives, and all of a sudden your face gets involved. And when your face gets involved, your feet stop moving. And that happened to Caden Proctor numerous times last year. It happened to him against Michigan, but it also happened to Will Conformi last week. I'd say it's a little bit of everything, Simone. It's not just, Wilcom needs to come, needs to go out there and play better.
Sure.
But you can also do things offensively. You can, Kalen DeBoer, Nick Sheridan, those guys can do things to help him out. You can run play action passes. You can not leave him on an island with these rush defensive ends. You can do different things to help him out as well. So maybe not pulling the plug on him as a player at right tackle during the game, but I think they were a little bit slow to adjust in some of the things South Florida was doing defensively. And I think if they, had it to take back themselves, don't leave him on an island. Put an Oots or a Dupree next to him and ship on the way out and, slide protection and things like that. So there's a number of different errors along the way, but there's always more answers to the equation. And I think that you would probably change a few of those things along the way.
I think it's a very, very fair and accurate assessment. So appreciate your input on that, no doubt, in a position that you certainly unbelievably well versed at, way more than the rest of us. There's no doubt for sure. I want to quickly wrap up our offensive talk with just the play of Jalen Milroe. I feel as though this is a guy who, he's gone through several different schemes and systems, so to speak, in his time. He waited his time to become the starter. We saw him really come into his own last year. Then, of course, a coaching change that comes with all types of changes. Is there a confidence that you have being able to see what it is that he's been able to produce? Hasn't always been perfect, but at the end of the day, when he makes plays, especially with his feet, I know you've alluded to that's not what I want to see every single week because I don't want him to get drilled going out of bounds or something, right? You want to be able to use the run game too. But it seems as though he's playing with a quiet confidence and just being that leader that I think we just really, really saw come into their own a year ago.
Yeah, and really the leadership is the one thing I'm most proud to see on the field. And I've been around a lot of good quarterbacks. Matt Ryan very famously used to always say to us, I want to be a palms down kind of guy, not a palms up kind of guy, right? You don't want to look around at your players and say, hey, what are you doing? What are you doing? Or look, he's a palms down guy. Jalen Milroe is hey, everybody just calm down. We're going to continue to do the things that have got us in this direction. I do think that Jalen Milroe was off on some of the go routes you saw early in the game. We saw a number of one-on-one, press coverages on the outside, and he trusted his wide receivers to kind of go get the ball. There were some overthrows. There was some, not clean releases on his routes. I think we probably tried one too many of the go routes there in the first half. And when you add that to the holding calls, that leads to questions. But to me, like you said, the leadership and just kind of bringing a calming nature to this offense and really to this entire team. It's the reason he's a captain. It's one of the reasons you get excited that he stuck around for the Kalen DeBoer era. And it's one of the reasons that I'll be on team Jalen Milroe until the wheels fall off and he leaves the University of Alabama. I just think he's so healthy with his mindset for what this team is trying to accomplish.
Yeah, he really is. No question about that. And he's going to need a healthy palms down type of mentality going on the road now in a Power 4 game against Wisconsin. How do you view this as maybe similar in terms of, that you don't have as much on at the line as opposed to like an SEC type of game? It's still one of those prepare you for conference play type of games. But nonetheless, this is going to be higher caliber players, guys who are more equally matched, so to speak, maybe talent-wise. How do you view this matchup and what we've seen from the first 2 weeks and kind of what it is we should expect going into Saturday?
Well, it's weird. This is not your dad's Wisconsin. It's not even my Wisconsin, and I'm not even 40 years old yet. This is a different Wisconsin. A lot of people, Alabama fans, will remember the name Phil Longo, who is the offensive coordinator there now, who was at Ole Miss 5-6 years ago. I think the 2018 season he was at Ole Miss. He is a air raid background, but then he has now meshed it in with the physicality of Wisconsin's offensive line. So
Sure.
you're not going to get the slash and dash that you did from South Florida in terms of Byron Brown running the ball, running a million plays, a million miles an hour. But this isn't the two tight end Wisconsin that you've seen numerous times over the year. They are going to go 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, 4 wide receivers. And as always, Wisconsin's got those running backs that have no neck, and they just look like they're going to run over everybody.
Sure.
And they do have a good offensive line. So, keeping that mentality of really back against the wall, treat it like you're going into Auburn, going into Death Valley, and some of the other places that you played in the SEC.
Sure.
Still preparing for a physical matchup, but also understanding that Wisconsin these days is going to make you tackle in space. It's just what they are under Phil Longo. So I think it's honestly a great test. It's a little bit different. Tyler Van Dyke is not going to run the ball the way Byron Brown did last week. He's not going to take many of the deep shots, but it will be a very technical kind of passing game, as they kind of mesh across the middle of the field and try to get guys open.
Alabama, a 16-point favorite on the road. As we know, the atmosphere on the road in any P4, 5, most schools, I should say, it presents a challenge that, I would argue there's no conference more difficult than the SEC. You go into places like Auburn or Athens, Ole Miss. They all present their challenges. And so to go to somewhere where you haven't been in a conference that, there's definitely some they don't like each other. Okay. That's just the truth. Big 10, whatever they are, the Big 17, however they have now, they don't like the SEC and vice versa. Who's the better conference, right? So there's a little bit of chip on your shoulder when you go into a matchup like this too.
It reminds me a lot, Alabama went to Penn State. I believe that was 2010 or 2011, right after I left. Kind of feels like that, right? Kind of has that feel, although Camp Randall at noontime, different than Happy Valley at nighttime, but it's still going to be a rowdy crowd. And I'm with you. There is something, even though Auburn and LSU and Ole Miss, and they're very raucous places, there is a kind of calming feeling that you get walking into a locker room that you've been in before and knowing that you've played in certain places and know what to expect.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a different vibe. A noon game at Wisconsin and a Big Ten stadium.
We even like
you'll have to react quickly.
What type of conference puts their biggest game at noon anyway? Come on, get out of here with that. So it'll be 11 a.m. for all of us in the Central Time Zone. So pour your coffee and get up, guys. Get your donuts and get going bright and early because Lord have mercy, I don't even like being up that early on a Saturday. So.
Bama fans won't even have a good chance to get lathered up unless you're waking up really early again. So
they'll be hitting their stride time in the third quarter, and hopefully things look different than last week. And they're really going to need to be hitting their stride in the third quarter. There's no doubt about that. Is there some maybe a position group or player that you feel as though you've kind of pinpointed as the type of guy that you want to see kind of take that next step, someone that you think could be a difference maker in this program in Kalen DeBoer's first year before they really hit the SEC schedule and then get into the nitty gritty of when it counts the most?
Well, I think there's a number of different guys. First of all, Tim Keenan. I know that Coach DeBoer kind of shouted him out last week. I think this game has him written all over it. And this is a guy who obviously has been around Bama's program for a while. Yeah. But you want to talk about a matchup that was made for a guy like Tim Keenan. It just point blank. Wisconsin has a number of offensive linemen that are just absolutely physical, that are going to try to run you over. They're going to try to do different things. And also a guy like Q Robinson, who you and I talked about last week, and obviously dealing with a lot of things personally going on. But, Coach DeBoer was very complimentary of what he's doing these days as well. So it's weird because you go into these games, Simone, and you kind of pinpoint a guy like Tim Keenan. And then you do realize that the Wisconsin, like I said earlier, is air raid now. And you have to have bigger bodies to stop the bigger bodied run game in the offensive line. But they also have to be athletic enough to kind of make tackles in space and some of the skill guys. So that front seven for Alabama is dealing with one of the more unique challenges I've ever seen, in terms of personnel, because this is a Wisconsin team, for lack of a better term. I think they're having an identity crisis. I really feel like I don't know if we're gonna be 350 across offensive line and pound it, or are we gonna spread you out and go 5 wide and see if we can dink and dunk like a Mike Leach offense? I don't know what they are. I don't think they know what they are. So that even makes it more difficult for Alabama to kind of prepare for it. And what's funny about it, and I noticed a lot of people watching this probably, obviously watched Bama and South Florida last weekend. Wisconsin had a very similar game. When you go back and watch Wisconsin last week against South Dakota, they didn't run away with it against, an FCS opponent in South Dakota. It was very much kind of down to the second half. South Dakota did a number of things that gave them fits. and really were able to get away with a lot of things in the open field in terms of their skilled players, which I think is probably why Vegas has made the spread at 16, even though Alabama struggled so much last week. So
Sure.
I think it's really, to me, this is a Jam Miller and Justice Haynes style game. If they can get to the second level, I don't know that anybody at the second and third levels of Wisconsin's defense can really stop them from hitting home runs, much less a Jalen Milroe. If he gets loose, I think it's over all day as well. So it is. I think this is an opportunity for Wisconsin to say, look, we did not play well against South Dakota. We're in a little bit of a transition period. Tyler Van Dyke is coming from Miami, but he's not a running threat. It's this strange kind of marriage of all these different ingredients you pluck from Wisconsin football and air raid football and Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, and you put them all together and you try to come up with the best game plan possible, but they're going to do everything they can to knock Alabama off and make their footprint known in college football.
Yeah, it's more difficult than ever to get a bunch of guys from a bunch of different places together and figure it out before like week one. And if you don't, hopefully figure it out before conference play begins. And that is kind of what we've seen across college football. No doubt about that. Mike, before you go, let's put a number on this one. Obviously, Alabama going to be on the road for the first time, dealing with the crowd noise, dealing with the intangibles that come with just having a new atmosphere and an early game and just, there's a lot of weirdness to that to an extent. What do you like score-wise from this matchup, Alabama going into a 16-point favorite?
Well, I know that 16-point favorite, a lot will be made about that, and I know that Alabama struggled at times a week ago, but penalties are the great equalizer in college football, and I think that if you can avoid those penalties, I really do think Alabama runs away with this. And there's questions about the offensive line, there's questions about Coach DeBoer, there's questions about all these things after playing South Florida. People are going to realize South Florida is a good football team. That is a team that has a chance to make a playoff as a kind of group of five team at large bid. So
early prediction. I like that, by the way. We're going to come back to this someday in like 2-3 months from now and to be like, wow, this dude should be like a genie, have a crystal ball. That's incredible.
I really, and I don't even know what the over-under number is, but it just feels to me I'm going to go somewhere along the lines of 28-10.
Okay, that's actually my score. So I'm saying that out loud.
There you go. Yeah, no, I think it's an under. I think it's a very physical, very defensive football game. I just think that Alabama's skill players are at a different level than Wisconsin can deal with defensively. I think it'll be a bruiser in the first quarter, but I think you'll see one of those 60-yarders from Jam Miller, a 40-yarder from Justice Haynes, maybe Jalen Milroe breaks free as well. I think it's an explosive offense. Maybe not one that puts together 12, 13, 14-play drives for Alabama, but like I said, once you get to second and third levels for Alabama's skill players, I don't think Wisconsin's tackling those guys.
I like it. Looking forward to the early kickoff. Make sure you get your coffee ready. Watch the little game day, then flip it over as Alabama, Wisconsin kick things off at 11 a.m. Central, of course, noon if you are speaking Big Ten language. Mike Johnson, appreciate your time. Looking forward to next week. Hopefully the Tide rolling into a 3-0 start as they kick off conference play. So going to look forward to that one. Week 3 for now, though. Can't turn the page just yet. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in to Head to Head. For Mike, I'm Simone. We'll see you next week.
Brought to you by Alabama Beef Farmers and Ranchers.